Welcome back to Neuroconversing Leadership, where we talk about effective communication and leadership, especially in the STEM place. I'm Jeremy Doran, and I love to help engineers grow into their role as leaders with less headache and less pain. Today, we have a special guest, Michael Collins. Michael, welcome.
Hey, thank you. It's good to be here. I appreciate it.
So you are not quite the typical engineer that I would have on this show. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got there?
Absolutely. Well, yeah. So I would say I come from a brand of engineering I occasionally call the honorary engineering. So I'm an audio engineer right now. What we do at Blue Fox is produce and run live events in the corporate sector. So anytime you go to a conference, sometimes in trade shows, sales meetings, anything where you're going into a larger room, there's a lot of people coming together. Whether it's now we do audio, visual, lighting, all that sort of stuff. But when I started, I was in school for audio engineering, which at the time was very much embedded in a music program. So don't want to date myself. Obviously, there's a lot of options now. But I started out more so on the music side, but an interest in audio engineering. And through schooling and whatnot, the world was opened up a little bit in the sense of, there's this kind of more music, more actively using equipment side of things. And then as far as audio engineers are concerned, there's also the very, very technical side where they're in there working with the actual electronics that create the tools that the rest of us use. So, just something as simple as maybe a name you do or don't know. It's Rupert Neve, but he's basically a physicist type guy who is talking. He'll go on a long explanation of this, which I cannot do in any way. But talking about the different ways that you coil the copper in a certain way that make a preamp sound just very musical. So that's kind of how I started and into it. And it's there's an interesting fine line between all the things that are super interesting to me, but I couldn't possibly explain, and just going out there and trying to make things sound pretty.
Nice. It's an interesting combination, someone who's very into music and also into technical things. Mm-hmm. You must interact with people on both sides of that. What have you noticed as differences?
That's a very good point. I think, and even for myself, as I've been developing in my role, which is more so in leadership now, there's an aspect of analysis and depth and just data that you kind of try to pull out when you're in that engineering side or as you're doing whatnot, that as you're then working with others, say maybe more on the sales side or the high level side, where it's developing the ability to truncate your explanations or your descriptions to a point where it's like, this is more palatable and just easier to digest, perhaps, for someone who's, I don't want to say they don't care, but they're more on the top line or the bottom line of what are you trying to tell me, that sort of thing. So I think there's an aspect of that. Of the way we communicate is super important, as far as sometimes a very direct, whether kind or not, cut and dry. Just the awareness of how we're communicating with people is a little bit different, and I think there's broader strokes of, are you talking to a very deep engineer who's entirely there and maybe just not aware of it versus, talking to someone is going to be far more emotive.
Yeah, it can be a challenge, and it's not just engineers.
Yeah.
People like to use them as examples, and there's lots of good jokes about engineers communicating. But just communicating with people who are different than you is always a challenge.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think if even just the timeline of when I talk to people is super important, because I found out a couple years ago that I'm ADHD, which so depending on if I'm medicated or not also changes my ability to even put a whole sentence together for you.
Wow.
Yeah, just being aware of that sort of thing is also challenging, and just knowing, like I say, they've got a lot of people on staff, and maybe about half of us are in one way or another technical, and just recognizing that having some sort of ability to decide how linear is this meeting we're in, or how linear is my communication that I'm trying. Do I need to give myself an outline just so I can talk to you today? That sort of things is a challenge sometimes as well.
Is there a time of day that's better?
I've found recently, yes, it's the morning time. So we travel a fair amount, we work across the country and whatnot. And I found if I'm communicating or just need to get lock in, focus, get things done. It's morning time, and like my favorite is actually like an 8:45 a.m. flight. If I, it's like, okay, I'll leave the house about 6:45, take my Adderall and whatever else at 7, get my coffee at the airport. Then I'm stuck on a plane for 2 to 3 hours. I might as well not work the rest of the week. It's great.
I find I'm a little too tall for airplanes, so working on them is very cramped for me.
Yeah, you always have to get the right seat. Like it's the aisle on the left side, so that my mouse hand can still work. That's
Nice.
usually where that's my sweet spot.
So you have a specific time for a flight and a specific seat, and I like it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, everybody at the office thinks I'm insane because they're like, "Oh, it's it's a nice time to like sit and watch a movie or do something." I'm like, "No, this is my prime work time."
Yep. That's fun. So tell me your role now and a little bit more about the size of your company and who reports to you.
Absolutely, yeah. So in our structure now, so I'm president of Blue Fox Production. We rebranded to Blue Fox about 2018, 2019. So in the scheme of things, relatively young company. We've got 12 full-time staff, including myself. And then the events industry is incredibly heavy on the contractor side, especially in some of those technical positions and whatnot, because, we can go out and have 30, 40 people, staffed on a show, but obviously day to day I can't support that kind of that payroll and whatnot. So it's great. You do end up working with the same people a whole lot, but it is something where, they always bounce around and do that sort of thing. Size of the company, I mean, I say there's 12 of us. We're Midwest-based. I find that it's been interesting actually going through COVID even was a curious experience just because, overnight we shifted into a broadcast sort of company, and everybody did. Everybody had a studio suddenly when COVID happened. But we were fortunate. I mean, at that time we were very small. I think there was like 4 of us going into COVID as far as full-time staff. And then we were just very fortunate as well. Like we've got a background in broadcast. I was in the megachurch land, and so our first broadcast studio that we built was probably in like 2010, something like that. So I got into the broadcast side of it a lot. My formal education was more so on studio recording and that sort of deal. So a lot of things just kind of came together to help allow that to function well. And so through that, we ended up growing actually a lot more in the Kansas City market where we're based, and as well as just like continuing the march as we look at these shows across the country that we do. So I want to say, I mean, it's a little bit of a mixed bag just because there's so many different styles of show, but we'll do somewhere between 100 and 150 shows a year, and just depending on size and where they are and what we're doing. So already this year, obviously, we've been San Francisco to Miami, so, got one in New York and San Diego, and it's all points in between. Usually there's not an ocean between us and where we're going, but if anybody's listening wants to take me to Hawaii, I'm on board. We'll figure it out. But
It's a small ocean. It's fine.
yeah, exactly. It's not like a big one.
So a couple of questions. What have you found is the difference between managing people who are actually on your team and work directly for you versus contractors? Is there a difference in the way that you have to interact with them?
Yes and no. I think in our industry, especially when contractors involved, it's it's a finite amount of time. You're looking at here's maybe a week-long show, and that's really when we're going to be interacting the most. So I think what that does for us is really reiterate the importance of how we're documenting and communicating, and how do we prepare them to then suddenly just show up on site and execute the show. I think that's probably the biggest learning, because if you're doing smaller shows and it's all just within your team and whatnot, there's a tendency, or at least for me, to be like, there's a lot more hallway conversations. There's a lot more, we're in the same building a lot, that sort of deal where communication can just naturally happen in an organic sense. Versus most of these people, especially if it's a travel show, they don't live in Kansas City. They're not going to stop by the office. So just recognizing, that you need to be proactive in the communication and finding the right level of detail again, so that you can send out one good pre-production email, some links to some plots and some technical jargon that is pertinent to them, but not overwhelming it so that they're like, I'm not going to read that.
Yeah, it's interesting. With your own people, you have a base of common knowledge, and you can make assumptions about what they do and don't know.
Yeah.
With other people who are new, you said a lot of times it's recurring, but sometimes it's going to be brand new, and you just can't make the assumptions that you can make with the people you work with directly.
Yeah, no, that's super, super important and very true. Like when, for example, coming out of COVID again, the labor force was pretty well decimated, as far as either just people who moved on or found something else or were just afraid to come back to events for a long time. So really, even to some extent, even within our own ranks, it's like you don't want to make those assumptions of what do they necessarily know already and don't know, because there's all these different levels. So obviously there's staff, which we're pretty well, ingrained, and we just understand each other pretty well. But then even that first level of like a local contractor who you might see a lot, they actually might stop by the shop, this, that, and the other. But then you go the next step over of now you're communicating with a contractor from the West Coast who's going to meet you X, Y, Z, and then beyond that, we work directly with clients and brands and whatnot, but we also work with agencies and whatnot. So you can't assume that each person at an agency actually has the same level of experience when it comes to producing shows. Like maybe they do something like more incentive trips, or they do this, that, and the other. So recognizing that just you can't make those assumptions a lot of time, and meeting someone new almost strikes you as like, I need to remember the questions I forget to ask, is basically what it comes down to. Especially if you're, you got my brain and I'm, bouncing off, or I haven't taken my meds or anything.
So on that topic of having ADHD, how do you cope with that in the workplace? And a lot of times if we have a strength, then we're going to lean into that strength, and then we bolster our weaknesses with other people. Is that a strategy you've taken, or have you found a way to just cope with it and overcome it?
That's an interesting question, because I'd say, depending on who you ask on staff, they'd say I haven't. But the way I approach it now, and I think it's interesting. It's almost because, I don't consider myself to be a particularly old guy, but I'm also not as young as I used to be. And I liken it to the same way that I don't, recover from a long day physically like I used to. My back doesn't just fix itself anymore, that sort of thing. I think it's a similar aspect, or at least in my experience, it's a similar thing, because I, was not diagnosed with ADHD till a couple of years ago. So somehow I went for several decades without it being a problem. So having said that, I feel like it's actually just the amount of energy that is available for me to overcome something, quote unquote. So it was very interesting, because I think for some period of life, it's like if I have to sit down and focus and just do something, somehow I can, And now as I'm getting older, it's like just the energy and the strength to do that is not there. So that's kind of an interesting, I don't know, I still process it because it's still relatively new to me, and just figuring out like, okay, medication is important, and that does help. I noticed a difference. Like I was very, very very intent on getting a refill before I came and talked to you, for example. It's like, if we're not in the same room, it loses some of its charm. But on the flip side of that, and I think this is, there's the aspect of whether it's ADHD or any other issue that you have. I think there's that aspect of it, but also to your point of like, something that we've been starting to lean into just in the last couple of years, the working genius model with Patrick Lencioni, if you're aware, and all that. So just natural altitudes of a project, for example, that we're interested in. So are you really high level? Are you, are you the tenacious, just want to get those little details done? Like, where do you naturally fall in? We've kind of started to lean into that a little bit more, and then also just identifying or observing us, like, it gives you kind of a basic language as to understand, like, my VP of admin and finance and everything. Like, he's definitely more the detail analysis. I might be a little more grander scheme. I might be a little creative here and there, versus, then in marketing, there's a creative aspect of it, but she's also pretty tenacious and, gets things done. And to your point, I think that I'd almost take out of the realm of, ADHD or any of the communication side, just recognizing you have to have people who are not like you to fill in the gaps. And then for me, and probably for, I don't know, the human condition, like there's an aspect of just the ego of, I really like being the guy who figures things out, and I'm not going to be the guy who can figure everything out. So there's, I think that's almost as much of a challenge when it comes down to it as possible. And I am a person who believes in, really leaning on your strengths and learning that, and just kind of really reinvesting in it. But also, there's an aspect of my role now, which is very much just leadership and communication and kind of guidance, which translates to something I do need to work on. And I feel I have a fair amount of I don't know, stage presence, we'll call. Like, I'm a musician guy, so there is some aspect of that, but then translating and trying to cope with that and bring that into something that's a little more functional. Like, how do I convey, this is our kind of direction for the next 2 or 3 years for the company, and how do we, really build that and allow ourselves to create the structure and whatnot and make that interesting to convey, because ultimately I'm not going to be doing much of it. They have to do all the work. So I was like really figuring out and just listening to how to do this better.
It's a never-ending learning process for all of us. It's one of the things you talked about is it's just tiring to do the things that aren't in your strength. So I spent a lot of time on the Myers-Briggs, and just because someone tends towards introversion doesn't mean they can't go out and talk to people. It just takes energy. And if you get a job where you can just focus on all of your strengths, it is like you're in the zone, because it doesn't take that extra energy. But when you need to do something that is outside of your realm, it's just extra work.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, and I find too, like there's a routine or regiment now that I'm finding I need to do and work with out too. Just how do you kind of cope naturally with some of the ADHD, the hyperactivity and that sort of thing. So it's like, I got to work out more, and part of it is, gets my brain settled down, but also part of it keeps my back from hurting, so really working through some of those things. And I do a lot. I mean, I have a decent commute, so I'm a podcast guy, so there's all sorts of just wacky stuff and just listen to keep your mind going. But then the flip side of that, there's so much useful information out there, as far as just like, I just try to listen and absorb. Like, I don't necessarily remember much, but it's like, it's almost kind of like going to church. I heard one time a preacher was, one of the congregants came up and said, I don't really remember any of your sermons. He's like, well, do you remember the what you ate for lunch on Wednesday? And he's like, no. Well, you still need to eat it, So there's like kind of a consistency. It's like just kind of keeping your mind in the leadership realm, or just like picking up a little, factoid of communication, or this, that, and the other. And so there's it's nice to find some tools here and there that, kind of give me a starting place. Like one time I had to write a toast, and I'm like, I just look at a page, and a blank page is the worst for me, because it's like I need some constructs, something to to start with. And so it's interesting because people have done that and they do it well.
What are some of your favorite podcasts?
I listen to some Craig Rochelle. He does some leadership podcast. I listen to just about anything with Scott Galloway. I really appreciate his level of thoughtful critique and analysis mixed with really inappropriate jokes. I think that's a nice pairing, honestly, that keeps the world going. I really appreciate, and I try to lean into, he's a guy who's done really well in life, and just the awareness of how fortunate we are when things are going well, and finding ways to invest in the next generation, or just being attentive to how we're setting up the next generation and what we're doing, even from a policy perspective or any of that, to really just try and make sure that the next generation has a chance to go onward and upward. There's one, I'm trying to remember, oh gosh, this was when I was really into, just trying to listen to anything communication-wise, because I just felt like I was really light on it. And there's I think it's called Think Fast, Talk Smart.
Yeah, Matthew Abrahams.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's right. I could not think of the name. But anyway, and that's where the book I got he's got a book, I think, by the same title that has the little thing in the back, like you're doing a toast. Here's your structure, that sort of deal. And then obviously I listen to a lot of music. I got a 6-year-old who's been listening or been watching a lot of movies, and so now we'll just build, a playlist with all that. So we do some nice mindless road music too.
I like it. I made sure that my daughter listened to music that I like growing up. So now she's 23, and some of her playlists are fantastic.
Oh, that's the way to do it. See, so my last one, so Sonic 3 is currently accurate. I don't, want to put our timestamp on this too bad, but Sonic 3 is really big. And so there's a couple, there's a Jelly Roll track or something he just goes crazy about. But then also in the movie, there's a Traveling Wilburys track, like into the lines on there. So now he's like real into the line. I'm like, okay, cool. So then when I heard that, I'm like, I bet you I could sneak some Petty into this playlist. And so, yeah, so we're having some fun. I'm getting some good driving music in on there.
I love it. I play volleyball, and I'm always in charge of the music, so I've got multiple playlists. A friend of mine who is an engineer, he had the volleyball court in his yard, and he designed the speakers. In volleyball, there's a 10-foot line where if you're from behind it, you can't jump when you're in front of it. He designed the speakers so that the dead spot was the 10-foot line. So as you were approaching the 10-foot line, the music would basically stop, and you would know that you couldn't go that much further. It was so cool.
Oh, there you go. See? Technology at its best.
Science and technology. So we need to start wrapping up. What are some ways that people can reach out to learn more about you?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, all over LinkedIn. If you look at Blue Fox Production, we're out of Kansas City. I mean, you can always ping us through the website. It's Blue Fox Production, no S, I believe. I can't remember. It's either in Australia or the UK. There's Blue Fox Productions. So different company, but that's that. Yeah, outside of that, I keep a pretty low profile outside of the company. So
great. And then you said that communication is something that you're always working on. Is there any one piece of advice you think that everyone can benefit from about communication?
This is more so on the kind of public or maybe larger scale presentation side of things. There's a necessity. I guess I want to say two things. One, around preparation of like, what are you trying to say and what do you need to say? Because if you just kind of show up, there is preparation to being impromptu, So I say that's important. And I think also if you're speaking out loud to someone and you want to practice ahead of time, just make sure you're saying it out loud too. Like I used to do manuscripts and things like that. And it's amazing how when you type it out and write it, and then you say it out loud, it's like, I wrote this and yet it doesn't sound like me. So I just say practice it out loud, record it, listen to it again. And when you stop going, ooh, that helps.
It's so interesting. I am currently writing a book that I hope to have by the end of this year. One of my friends who's also written a book recommended doing the audiobook first because that forces you to read it out loud.
Yeah.
And when you're reading it out loud, you'll like, that clanged. I need to rewrite
you're
that
just
one.
like, it's not wrong, but
but I'm not a robot, so that's not how I should be talking.
Yeah. Punctuation's definitely different when I talk.
Yes, for all of us. All right, Michael, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Neuroconversant Leadership. We're over 100 episodes now. And as mentioned, I'm going to be making some changes. So I would love your feedback on what changes I should make, what things I should add, what things I should take away. Please do me a favor and reach out either on LinkedIn or on my email address, which is jdoran@neuroconversantleadership.com. I look forward to hearing your suggestions. Thanks a lot. Until next time, have a great week.